If you want instant access to new videos as they're uploaded, then please click on the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment on the videos, and if you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com today and download a free trial. So we're practically at Cheltenham now, and I thought I'd go over with you some of the stats that I've collected over a period of time. And you know, Cheltenham trades very differently from other meetings, and even when you look at the big meetings like a Derby or a Cheltenham or a Royal Ascot or a Guineas or a Goodwood, they all trade differently. They all have different nuances within them. But the interesting thing about Cheltenham is when you look at National Hunt meetings, then obviously this is massive. Whereas during the flat season, you've got lots of little big meetings, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that makes any sense. But they all feel very different. And the key characteristic that you get with Cheltenham is just the enormous amounts of money. So typically you'll find on either side of the ladder, across a wide range of races, that there will be significant sums of money. And that has a dampening effect on the market. Basically the market tends not to move dramatically at Cheltenham. It tends to be stuck in the same place. Now that can be an issue, because if you imagine you've got your £100 or something somewhere and you're actively trying to trade that market, it may take ages and ages and ages and ages and ages for that order to fill. I've actually got some stats somewhere along how long that takes and so on, because I compare all of that data across different race meetings. But yeah, it just takes a lot longer than a normal race meeting. Even a big race meeting, it still takes an age to go through at Cheltenham. So that's a problem, because that increases your risk. If you open a trade here and then you try and close it there, and you're waiting for ages and ages to close the trade, it's got more chance of going wrong. So that can be a bit of an issue at Cheltenham. And also you can't get as many trades through as you'd like to, so the only response to that is to up stakes. So basically when you do a trade at Cheltenham, you have to be really sure that it's going to be right, because you'll generally be working with larger stakes if you want a decent payoff. And that can create a bit more tension in terms of the way that you trade. But on the plus side, the markets tend to be very slow, so you can practically pretty much put a trade in, go make a cup of coffee, come back, and it'll still be in the same place. Slight exaggeration there, but you get what I'm talking about there. You can tell how the market is just generally that much slower. But this is interesting, because you see, you know, 30, 50 grand, very big numbers on Betfair, but you don't tend to see that on BetDAC. So BetDAC is generally quite nice to trade during Cheltenham. It actually feels really quite nice. So BetDAC is always a good place to go if you want to trade during Cheltenham. I mean, you can trade both. That's what I tend to do. I tend to trade both at the same time. And it's quite possible to do that at Cheltenham because of the characteristics I just laid out for you. That means that you can actually switch from one screen to another and manage both positions, and it's not too crazy. Try doing that in the evening, on a Thursday evening or Friday evening at Wolverhampton or Chelmsford City, I can say now, and you know that you just can't do it. It's too hard. But it is possible during the large meetings, especially at Cheltenham. So I've got some really good results from BetDAC in previous years, and I suspect that that will be the same again this year. You can never tell, but I will certainly give it a try. So yeah, that's how Cheltenham feels from a trading perspective. And because of the large amount of money that's in the market, you tend to find that prices don't tend to move as much as they should do, although there have been some exceptions in recent years. There have been some very odd behaviour in recent years that, you know, I'll let you know through tweeting or whatever how I'm finding it and what I'm seeing in the market, because I can give you an indication as to how it's trading via previous years, because I've traded every Cheltenham since 2004, I think. Maybe it must have been about 2004, I think, when I started doing racing really seriously. So yeah, I've seen them all, got stats from all of them, and so on and so forth. Talking of stats, I'm going to give you some ideas on the sort of numbers and so on. Hopefully I'll get some graphics up at this particular point. But if you look at the turnover at Cheltenham, it's really interesting, because in 2009 it did 94 million, in 2010 it did 94 million. Guess what it did in 2011? 94 million. And then in 2012 it actually spiked up dramatically for some reason, not sure about that. Came down a bit in 2013, around 97 million, and 2014 it did 94 million. So yeah, it's interesting to see that, you know, the turnover is bizarrely static, and this is turnover before the start of the race. So that's really interesting to see. Now, I've noticed some anomalies in the racing at the start of 2015, which I haven't commented on yet because I haven't trapped and framed them well enough. But I will do a video about this at some point, so I'm really interested in seeing how the volume stacks up at Cheltenham this year. So yeah, that's a really interesting thing that I'm going to be looking out for at this Cheltenham. If you look at the amount of turnover that has been done on in-play, then that's generally been rising. It did 11 million in 2009, and last year that reached nearly 17 million. So the proportion of money that's being traded in play is actually rising. So that's pretty interesting. And typically at Cheltenham, the volume in running has always been below what you'd expect to see during a normal race day. But that is rising at the moment, so that's quite interesting to see as well. But generally turnover is pretty flat, and you know, that doesn't seem to have pretty much gone anywhere for a few years. There could be a number of reasons for that. It's too long to discuss on this video. But if you look at the feature, not feature races, the biggest races at each of the meetings since 2009, you go 7.8 million, 10.7, 7, 11.1, 11.5, and in fact in 2013 there was an 11.5 and an 11.3. And last year was a 9.1 was the biggest race. Now, when you look at you know, the amount of turnover on a big race, then it inevitably tends to be tied to short price favourites. Everybody, especially when they're half drunk in the crowd at Cheltenham, will just pile on to you know, the shortest price possible. So you know, you look at the shortest price on some of these numbers that I've just read out, and they are quite short: 2.8. 1.93, 204, 179, 28, and 266. But there are quite a lot of competitive handicaps and just generally competitive races at Cheltenham. So they tend to attract lower volume, but those big numbers tend to come from the very short price favourites. And because there's a lot of money on the short price favourites, it's inevitable that that will, you know, create quite a busy market. So quite interesting to see there. If you look at the amount of turnover that the favourite does, that's hovered around the sort of 50 million mark. So 49, 45, 42, 60, 50 and 40 last year in millions. So the favourite tends to take around 50% or more of the volume that you see in the market. So you know, it's the same in every race. That's where all the action is. And in fact, that proportion is slightly lower at Cheltenham because there's more money getting spread around the markets, because everybody has a view, and Cheltenham's really incredibly well researched, so money tends to be a bit more evenly spread across those markets. If you look at the traded range that you see at Cheltenham, then in other words how volatile the markets are, they tend to be about a third less than you would see on a normal race meeting. But the curious thing is that that is increasing over time. So every year that passes, those races that don't seem to make any sense seem to be more common. Where you're trading it one way and you're thinking, okay, what happened there? So, you know, you have to be a little bit aware of that. You know, again, that's something I'm going to be watching very, very closely this year to see how that's behaving. But typically, as you'd expect, there's a lot of movement on the favourite. In the middle of the field, there isn't a great deal of movement, and then it tends, as you go towards the back end of the field, there tends to be a little bit more movement on there. Things get backed in from 800s to 600s, or go from 150 to 300. But yeah, in that sort of middle, if you're looking from the second to the 8th favourite, that's where the market seems to be fairly similar across it, but it tends to be a little bit more volatile on the favourite, which is why most people trade the favourite. Yeah. If you look at the maximum traded range, in other words, you know, were there really odd markets, this is where we can see progressively as years have gone on, that volatility is rising. So if we look at the maximum traded range that we saw on individual years, that's generally gone upwards. So it's sort of, you get the odd race where things just go a little bit bonkers. So in 2010 we had one race with 151 tick range, which is mental. But that generally doesn't occur. But the maximum range, in other words, you know, some of these really big moves can be pretty large. And I noticed some comments from the blogosphere last year saying, well, that was absolutely bonkers, I've never seen that before. Well, yes, you have, because it's occurred nearly every year. There's always one race where something really gets heavily backed or heavily laid. That could be down to the weather, jockey change, combination of the two, many different factors. I don't profess to be like a massive racing expert, so I don't look at those things in the market. The market tells me everything that I need to know. I may not know what's causing that move, but I can see it in the market, and that's what I exploit, basically. So, I'll have a view on those, but not good enough to be able to outthink the market. But it doesn't matter anyway, because I will see all of that information reflected in the market, and I will trade it. But yeah, last year we had a move of 85 ticks, the year before 82, the year before that 97, and the year before that 79. So there are some bonkers moves. But generally, I'm just looking here to see if there's anything significant in any particular part of the market, and I can't really. Bonkers moves can occur from pretty much anywhere. They're more likely to occur mid-division to the rear of the field, but you do get some big moves on the favourites. So, the biggest move last year was 45 tick move. The year before that was 38, 45, 34, 34, 30. So you can see that gradient is basically, it's getting a little bit more wild as the years pass. And that's sort of generally reflected across most of the stats. So yeah, that's interesting to note as well. One thing that's confused me in recent years is the propensity for the book to SP below 100%. So when we're talking about that, what we're saying is the market has to be priced at 100%. In a 10-runner field, one horse will win that race, and therefore you're saying the chance of that occurring is 100%. And when you bet into a 100% book, there's theoretically no loss to either side of the book. And if you can back below 100%, then you're guaranteed a profit. It's amazing how many races have SP'd below 100%. It means that backing is on an exchange is fantastic value. It's unbelievable, really. If you get a 28-runner handicap at all big prices, maybe 13's the field or something, or 15's the field. You can sometimes get these at 100% book or maybe slightly below. It's incredible. That really actually doesn't make any sense at all. There's no point in taking risk at that level. But it is amazing to see that occurs. So, 2009 we had one market that SP'd under 100%, 8 in 2010, 12 in 2011, 11 in 2012, there were only 3 in 2013, and there were 9 last year. So, it's pretty amazing, really. And if you look at the average SP, it reads 101.8, 1.7, 0.5, 1.9, 0.5, 2.7. So actually, even if you were just outright backing on an exchange rather than a sports book, the price at which the market is gravitating to is incredibly tight. So I think you stand a fair chance of profiting even if you're just backing during Cheltenham. But obviously the place to look, therefore, is Dutching. Go into BetAngel, look at the Dutching tool, and start covering larger parts of the field, because you're really not going to lose an awful lot to the rest of the book, especially with SPs that are coming in so close to that, and the market's so tight that finding a winner by Dutching is going to be a good job. It's going to be very likely to find that. I did actually write in Racing Ahead magazine about which parts of the field to Dutch. I don't have that information to hand. I suggest you get a copy of Racing Ahead magazine if you want to find that out. Because they asked me to write specifically about something to sell magazines, so go and buy one. And I must admit I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I did do some research about which parts of the field found most value, and that's obviously because that's a traditional gambling type thing, whereas obviously I'm talking about trading typically here. And incidentally, there is a thing about where winners came from as well. What I'll do at this point in the video is I will stick up a large graphic. You can stop the video and have a look at that if you want to go into depth. I'm not going to talk you through each one of those columns, but it just shows you basically in order of favoritism from 1 to X where most of the winners came from each year. You may want to have a look at that. But obviously it's the price you get the winner at that's important, as well as where it came from. If you look at in running, one of the interesting notes that I've made in here is that when you look at the in-running market, laying to back is a little riskier at shorter prices at Cheltenham, and that is because on all the analysis that I've done, bigger prices that perform well in running tend to shorten quickly, but when you look at short prices, they need to be really out of contention to drift significantly. So the in-running punters at Cheltenham are basically saying, this is the horse, it's in the lead, or maybe it's not in the lead, or it's being held up, and it's going to be presented for the win. And I'm not changing my mind about that. So it doesn't tend to drift dramatically before coming in and going on to win. It's only when the horse obviously is not going to win that the price flies out. But if you look at the back of the book, you tend to find prices crashing in fairly quickly. So that's the place, you know, to have a look at if you're going to do something in running. But the in-running markets behave very differently, and I've hinted at that earlier on in the video as well. But typically, the way that I tend to trade these big meetings, especially Cheltenham, is it runs from Tuesday to Friday. So on the Tuesday, I'm going all guns blazing. I have everything set up. I've got spreadsheets recording data, loads of things happening, and I'm going to use that day just to set my stall out for how the rest of the week is going to trade and how it's going to go. And I don't, you know, go all guns blazing. I tend to take it a little bit more cautiously on Tuesday, try and work out and reaffirm what I've, you know, figured out from last year, and is it trading the same way? Are there any subtle differences or behaviour changes that we've seen? And then I tend to take that forward to the rest of the week. So typically my P&L on Tuesday is the lowest, and then it starts to climb all the way up to the Gold Cup on Friday. And that's just the way I play it, because I want to go in on big stakes. I want to be sure what I'm doing, so I tend to use Tuesday as a bit of an experimental day. Looking at the anti-post market, I've noticed that there are some shorties on Tuesday. I haven't looked at it again recently today. You know, maybe there's been a few withdrawals or things have shuffled around. But typically, I want a mixture of different meetings on the Tuesday so I can get a firmer grip on exactly what I'm looking at. So yeah, Tuesday will be my day for experimenting, and then I'll build on that on Wednesday. And if I'm pretty certain about what's going on by Wednesday, I'll really put my foot down on Thursday and Friday. So that's how I tend to approach it. So yeah, Cheltenham is a big event. Like I said, 94 million repeatedly traded in total volume over the X number of years, 5 years or so. And that creates problems and opportunities at the same time. So I'm looking forward to Cheltenham. I'm hoping that it will trade reasonably well. And I'm looking forward to reporting back to you on the blog and via other social media how that's going. And if you want to check in on social media, I'll be endeavouring to give you updates as to what I'm seeing in the market and how it's trading. But I'm looking forward to it. Hope you have a really great Cheltenham, and look forward to giving you an update soon. If you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com today and download a free trial.